On November 21st, the United States imposed sanctions on Russia's financial sector, which analysts consider among the most impactful since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The sanctions target numerous officials, financial institutions, and approximately 50 international banks operating in Russia, including Gazprom Bank. Clients from Turkey, Hungary, and the UI have already announced the discontinuation of services for Gazprom Bank cards.
This sweeping action will make it harder for the Kremlin to evade US sanctions and fund and equip its military. We will continue to take decisive steps against any financial channels Russia uses to support its illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine. Janet Yellen, United States Secretary of the Treasury, on the department's website.
Experts note that Gazprom Bank was one of the few channels through which Russia continued to assess foreign currency. Sanctions against it will likely exacerbate the ruble's depreciation.
These sanctions will worsen the exchange rate for the ruble. Additionally, affected banks will face severe financial issues, forcing Russia's central bank to refinance them, which will further destabilize the ruble.
The Russian financial market is already reeling. The ruble has plugged to its lowest value since March 2022, with the central bank setting the exchange rate at 102 rubles per dollar. Another factor contributing to the ruble's decline is Russia's recent use of the experimental ballistic missile Oreshnik against Ukraine.
Exchange rates are influenced not only by economic and trade factors but also by politics and even war. Why? Because of the theory of rational expectations, which means that exchange rates are shaped by the expectations of people, businesses and governments. The strike on the peaceful city of Dnipro involving the so-called Oreshnik weapon is widely regarded by the international community, including the business sector, as a grave mistake. It is expected to lead to diplomatic losses for Russia and, in the longer term, potentially military setbacks and new sanctions.
The ruble traded between 85.95 per dollar in early 2024, but began a slow decline in August, coinciding with Ukrainian military operations in Russia's Kursk region. Analysts note that the Kremlin has few tools left to stabilize the currency, and any efforts will reflect the border state of Russia's economy.
The exchange rate is influenced by both the government and the central bank, which exerts a more or less professional impact. Additionally, there is administrative interference. Large buyers or sellers of foreign currency often have overseers who adjust how much currency to buy or sell. This kind of intervention distorts the exchange rate, but only temporarily. Ultimately, what matters for the economy is the fundamental trend, and that cannot be halted through administrative measures. The fundamental trend is clear: the decline of the Russian currency is inevitable and will continue.
Since July 12th, sanctions have further restricted Russia's financial operations. The Moscow Exchange and National Settlement Depository have ceased transactions in dollars and euros. The central bank now calculates exchange rates based on over-the-counter data, making the figures less transparent and more volatile. Reported by Bastun Katerina, Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News.
Ukraine's Western partners imposed the first sanctions on Russian oil exports back in December 2022. Since then, Moscow has started assembling a so-called shadow fleet, which already numbers several hundred tankers. Until recently, they carried about 4 million barrels a day and brought billions of dollars to the aggressor country. Russia uses offshore companies to acquire vessels for the shadow fleet, which makes it much more difficult to track them.
With Moscow under Western sanctions, an increasing number of tankers are ferrying illicit goods and potential environmental devastation across the globe. Not only are these vessels creaky and largely unregulated, they are often uninsured, meaning that in case of a leak or more serious spill, a government would struggle to hold them accountable. From the political publication.
In the South China Sea near the coast of Malaysia, shadow fleet tankers meet to transport oil, according to the Bloomberg investigation. There, in July 2024, a Russian shadow fleet vessel crashed into another tanker, causing both of them to catch fire. Sky Truce, a non-governmental organization based on satellite images, said that 9 cases of oil spills caused by Russian shadow fleet tankers were reported. experts are sure that there are many more such incidents. The risks caused by activities of the Russian shadow fleet are global. The UK is more active than Ukraine's other partners in combating illegal oil transportation from the Federation. Not only another 30 ships, but also insurance companies that cover their operation have fallen under the sanctions imposed by London.
I'm announcing the biggest sanctions package of the Russian shadow fleet, and it underlines the UK commitment to Ukraine. We are supporting them by £3 billion a year, every year, for as long as it lasts, to support them militarily. And of course, with both economic and humanitarian aid, we continue to support Ukraine.
Bloomberg, citing anonymous sources in Brussels, writes that the EU plans to impose additional restrictions on the Russian shadow fleet. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on the partners to step up pressure on the Kremlin.
Це важливий крок.
This is an important step, and it would be right for European partners on the whole EU level, as well as other partners, to support such sanctions. The fewer excess profits Russia earns from oil, the fewer resources it will have to wage war. This is a clear connection, a connection that must work for the sake of real peace.
According to Bloomberg, Brussels may ban more than 45 Russian tankers from accessing European ports and services in the next sanctions package. At this point, the US sanctions list already includes 39 tankers of Russia's shadow fleet, while the European list only includes 19. Reported by Anastasia Tarnavska, Larissa Petruk, UATV News.
In its 2025 budget, the Kremlin has allocated a record $145 billion for its war against Ukraine, a figure expected to remain steady through 2026, according to Bloomberg. Oil revenues continue to be the backbone of Russia's budget. In December 2022, Kyiv's allies tried to curb these revenues by imposing a $60 per barrel price cap. However, Russia managed to bypass sanctions, using a so-called shadow fleet, all tankers registered in third-country jurisdictions. To counter this, the European Union is preparing its 15th sanctions package, which targets Russia's shadow fleet.
The European Union is working on a new package of sanctions aimed at targeting the shadow fleet of tankers Russia is using to get its oil to market. The package, which the bloc aims to approve before the end of year, is also expected to include penalties against individuals involved in the trade. From the Bloomberg publication.
However, analysts question the effectiveness of Brussels' plans, as the primary buyers of Russian oil are India and China.
The key question is how much of this fleet is truly shadow, and how can the EU enhance sanctions to prevent oil from reaching China and India. If these countries aren't sanctioning Russian oil, how can it be stopped?
Recent U.S. sanctions are receiving more price. On November 21st, the U.S. Department of the Treasury announced the disconnection of Gazprom Bank from the international SWIFT payment system. From December 20th, all financial transactions involving Gazprom will be prohibited. Several commercial banks have also been targeted. These sanctions have already caused Gazprom Bank cards to stop functioning in over 20 countries and pushed the ruble to its lowest level since March 2022. However, some experts believe that Washington's approach to sanctions has been too moderate.
Even with these sanctions, I would call Biden's sanction policy very restrained. It doesn't fundamentally destroy Russia's economy but creates difficulties. The impact is about 1% of GDP annually.
Sanction pressure could increase with Donald Trump's return to the White House. Trump has already pledged to ramp up U.S. oil production and lower its price to $40 per barrel. Analysts also expect heightened focus on the shadow fleet.
I am confident that under Trump there will be a ban on importing Russian natural gas and LNG into Europe, with the EU stepping in to fill the gap. I also expect targeted sanctions, for example, against the maritime fleet, specifically the shadow fleet that Russia uses to illegally transport oil to global markets. I believe severe sanctions will be imposed on them as well, potentially including the seizure of these ships and criminal criminal prosecution of their captains and the owners of the companies involved.
Meanwhile, Russia's economy is facing growing challenges. Massive investment in the military-industrial complex are creating systematic imbalances and fueling inflation. The Russian central bank has responded by repeatedly raising interest rates, stifling financial activity. However, inflation remains uncontrollable, and businesses are complaining about mounting pressure, while calling for central bank reforms. According to Kirill Budanov, chief of the main directorate of intelligence of Ukraine, Russia could face severe economic problems by the summer of 2025. Reported by Bastun Katerina, Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News.